Hello everyone. I read 19 books in May. That's a lot. I think that's the most I've ever read in a month. You guys know how these videos work. We're gonna get into my wrap up. I'm gonna tell you briefly about the book and my thoughts. I really hope you enjoy this video, and I'm worried it's gonna be like over an hour long, so we're gonna get straight into it. I had a pretty good reading month. There were a few 5 stars, but there were also a few absolute duds. The first book that I read was kind of in the middle. It was The Inmate by Freida McFadden, and I read this on Kindle Unlimited. Freida McFadden has fast become one of my favorite thriller authors. Are all of her books perfect? Absolutely not. But are they immensely readable and bingeable? 100%. The Inmate is no exception. This book is about our main character who nearly got murdered by her high school boyfriend when she was younger. Now she's an adult, she has a 10-year-old kid, and she moves back to her hometown and gets a job as the nurse in the local prison. And in that local prison is her ex-boyfriend from high school who tried to kill her. Obviously, a lot goes down. There are some secrets from the past that are uncovered, and this mystery is kind of brought up again to see if maybe there were things that they missed in the past about this potential like murder mystery. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I think it was, like most Freida McFadden books, really bingeable, a really fast read. I read it in the space of 24 hours. I think the biggest problem is that just like our main character was so stupid. She was so stupid, and there were so many things that were happening that I was like, you're an idiot. And I just don't think the plot was good enough to excuse the idiocy of our main character's actions. Usually when I read a thriller, I can excuse like a dumb main character if the plot is really good. But I think there were some things that happened that I was like, what is happening here? I think the plot twist at the end of the day was also really good. I thought like it definitely caught me off guard, but I don't know, I just feel like maybe it was the whole plot with her 10-year-old son. I just found that to be kind of boring. I wasn't like the biggest fan whenever she was like talking about her son. I don't know, there were just some things about this book that made it like not perfect, and while it was a fun and fast read, it's not going to be something that sticks with me for the rest of my life. And there are definitely better Freida McFadden books that I have read in the past. However, I'm really excited to read more of her backlist, so it was good to check another one off my list, especially because they're all on Kindle Unlimited, so I usually read like 1 a month, and honestly love that. The next book I read was another Kindle Unlimited book, and that was Faking with Benefits by Lily Gold. This is a reverse harem romance about our main character who is so unlucky with love. She's really bad with men, even if she's like really accomplished in the rest of her life. She lives across the hall from 3 guys that have this like dating podcast. She's friends with all of them. They decide to teach her how to date, and during the process she just like dates all 3 of them, and it's reverse harem. It's a why choose romance. So obviously, I mean, I think I would describe it as like New Girl, but our main character dates all of the roommates. I think for the most part this was really fun. I really liked our characters. I felt like they were all really well fleshed out. I just feel like the fake dating led to like a friends with benefits like sexual relationship way too fast, and there was just too much smut for me. I feel like we were getting more smut than actual romance and actual plot, which I think definitely has its function. Like there are some people that really love romance books for that reason, and they will read romance books for those kind of like spicier scenes. However, I don't mind a bit of smut, but it's not why I read romance. I read it for the plot and for the characters and the relationship that we get to see develop. And I do think this had a good relationship development. I rated it 3 stars. Obviously, there were things that I liked about the novel. I just felt like how much smut there was and how many sex scenes there were, it just made it a little boring, to be honest. It made it a little bit boring for me, and I found myself skimming those scenes because I feel like they didn't really add a whole lot to the narrative of the relationship. I will read more Lily Gold, I think. I know that she has some other kind of like reverse harem romances, and I actually don't mind that trope, but I think next time I will go in knowing that I will probably be getting more smut than like actual relationship development. So I guess it depends what sort of mood I'm in, you know, like there's a time and a place for those romances, and I don't know, May was not the time nor place. So yeah, but I still enjoyed my time reading it. Okay, now we get into all my physical books. I have a very massive pile next to me. Next, I read Girl in Pieces by Kathleen Glasgow. I read this for an episode of my Reading My Physical TBR series where the random number generator selects what I read, and unfortunately I gave this novel 2 stars. It's a debut novel from Kathleen Glasgow, and I was really excited to read it because the last Kathleen Glasgow book that I read was really emotional and really beautifully written, and this one I just didn't feel it was as beautifully written, and I think it was just a little bit like, I don't know, it kind of romanticized trauma a little bit in my eyes. We follow our main character Charlotte, who has recently lost her best friend, and she's been put in a mental institution because she's tried to commit suicide, and she comes from like a really traumatic past with her family. She's lived on the streets, like she's been through like every horrible thing that you can think of. I think I would have liked this book more if it was more about Charlotte's recovery, and I think it's, in a sense it is, but we spent so little time in the mental institution until then she's like let out onto the streets, and immediately she like forms this really toxic relationship with a guy who's addicted to meth. It's not really like I was watching her recover, it's kind of like I was watching her go through this downward spiral. There's massive trigger warnings for this novel, specifically and most, I think, prominently is self-harm, and I've not really experienced a whole lot of self-harm, so I didn't really know how to, I don't know, address it when I was talking about it in my reading vlog. But then I had comments from people being like, no, this, like, I have dealt with it and this is like immensely problematic because it's essentially a how-to guide. Once they said that, I was like, you know what, I completely see what you mean. There is so many graphic descriptions of self-harm in this novel that I feel like if I was to have gone through what the character has gone through, I would not find reading this very cathartic. It would honestly be super triggering, and it kind of like almost gives tips on like how to self-harm and like how to give yourself aftercare, and I just think that that is not very safe to write in a novel. I just didn't really appreciate it. I also hated reading about this really toxic relationship because I found like that was super romanticized, so therefore it was romanticizing substance abuse. I don't know, I just did not love this novel really. I also found it to be incredibly slow and incredibly boring beyond those like more toxic elements. So this one is definitely not a book that I recommend, and I was really disappointed by that because I do really love reading books with really hard-hitting subject matters, and this one, it was just immensely disappointing. Then next, I read another really disappointing book, and that is The Things We Do to Our Friends by Heather Darwin. This was one of my most anticipated 2023 releases, and it just really did not win me over. It was so disappointing. It's dark academia, and we follow our main character who gets into this college, and immediately she gets sucked in by this really enigmatic friend group, and she's obsessed with this girl Tabitha, and Tabitha starts, I don't know, some sort of secret project where they are kind of like vigilantes getting justice for women who have been fucked over by their husbands. It took so long for the plot to actually start moving, so it was really slow and really boring, first of all. On top of that, there was so much showing and not telling. Our characters were not developed whatsoever, and our main character keeps talking about how convincing and charismatic this girl Tabitha is, but I not once saw that on the page. I was just continuously told that she was really charismatic rather than me watching her be charismatic. So I just felt like this was not very well written at all. It wasn't well structured and it wasn't well developed. So it was just an incredibly disappointing read, which I ended up giving 2 stars also. This does not get the Jamie stamp of approval. Finally, things started looking up for me, not for long, but things started looking up for me in May, and I read Do I Know You by Emily Wibberley and Austin Steedman Broker. This is a marriage and turmoil romance about our 2 main characters who go on this anniversary trip, and when they're there they get mistaken for strangers, so they decide to play into that because they both know their relationship is not going how they wanted it to. They're kind of losing sight of what's important in their relationship, and they decide to play along. This book is a romance novel where like not a lot happens. It's not really action packed and it's not super fast and moving, but I really genuinely liked it so much. I think what I love about it is that our 2 main characters, we get to see both of their perspectives. It's dual perspective, and reading about the other character from the other person's perspective and why they think the relationship was going wrong was super refreshing, because the other relationship slash marriage and turmoil romances I've read have just been where the characters have been really childish and are just like hating each other and bullying each other essentially. Whereas in this novel it was really sweet. Like our characters didn't hate each other, there was no love lost, they still really cared about each other, and it was really beautiful to watch their 2 journeys as they were just trying to figure out their relationship and where they stood with each other. I loved the setting. I absolutely was obsessed with the side characters, and I know that this isn't a series, but I really hope we get novels about the side characters in here. I thought it was so well written, it had so much heart, and I cannot wait to read more of this author duo's work. After that, I read Things We Hide from the Light by Lucy Score, which is the sequel to Things We Never Got Over, which was one of my favorite romances of all time. So best believe I was really anticipating loving this one, and unfortunately I just didn't like this one as much. I still really liked elements of it, but at the end of the day I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I felt like a lot of the book was really boring, and so when you are writing a nearly 700 page or nearly 600 page romance novel, that's a risky choice. You know, you have to be able to do the slow burn really well, and I feel like Lucy Score did such a good job with it in the previous novel. I didn't feel like the slow burn was all that good right away. I feel like our characters were kind of just immediately attracted to each other and were immediately hooking up, and yes, there were things that like stopped them from being together like in the middle, so I guess you could kind of call it a slow burn. But when they're already hooking up within the first 100 pages and, you know, I have like 500 pages left, it doesn't leave room for a lot of tension, for a lot of yearning, and for me to kind of like want them to get together, because I've already seen them making out. You know, it's just, I want their like first kiss to be like a massive moment that I've really been waiting for, and I feel like I did not get that in this novel. There's kind of like a crime, like mystery, bounty hunter storyline in here as well, and I just feel like that kind of took precedence over the relationship, and that's not why I picked up this novel. Like, look at the cover. Do you really think I want to read about like crime when I'm picking up this cover? I don't. I read a lot of thrillers and like crime related novels this month, and I really wasn't anticipating this being one of them. I still really love Lucy Score's sense of humor. I loved being able to see the main characters from Things We Never Got Over and some of the side characters that we will be getting novels for as well. I loved seeing them in this book, and I loved, you know, all the scenes where our characters were all together hanging out, but for the most part, this just wasn't my favorite book, unfortunately. So the next 3 books I read in 3 days, because I was planning on doing a I read 7 thrillers in 7 days video for May, and that video immediately failed. Like, it was not good. But I had about like 40 minutes of footage still filmed, so I do have like an unfinished reading vlog which will be on my Patreon for these 3 books if you are interested in seeing like in the moment thoughts. You guys are gonna see why it failed. I read these 3 books for that video, or that attempted video. The first one was Falling by TJ Newman. This is the first book that I read for that week. 1 star. One of the worst books I've ever read in my life. I hated this. This is a thriller about our main character who is a pilot, and he goes to fly this plane, and while he's on board he finds out that his whole family has been taken hostage, and he can either continue flying the plane to safety and his family dies, or he crashes the plane, killing everyone on it, including himself, and his family is safe. I was really excited when reading that synopsis because it sounded really interesting, and I felt like we would get some really interesting discussions about like morality and like philosophically what's ethical and what isn't, and you know, those classic like philosophical discussions. I thought we would get a lot of these in here. Instead, we got, first of all, a very boring novel, so boring, so badly paced, but also incredibly offensive. And I was absolutely side-eyeing all of the good reviews on Goodreads, because was I the only one who was like, this is horrible? And then I went to the 1-star reviews and I was like, okay, my feelings have been validated. Like, there are people out there that hated this, but like, this author did the worst possible thing you could do when writing a plain terrorist book, and she made the terrorists Middle Eastern. This book was published in 2021. I have no idea what it's like to live in America and be Middle Eastern, or even live anywhere and be Middle Eastern, and face the incredibly harmful stereotypes that they have faced because of the terrorist attack on 9/11. We literally had a terrorist attack in my country against an entire Muslim community by a white man quite recently, like within the past 5 years, because of those really harmful stereotypes that people have perpetrated against Middle Eastern people. So reading about it in this book that was published in 2021, I was in horror. Like, I was shocked and horrified, and I kept reading it to be like, surely there's some sort of explanation, like surely it's not gonna be this, and it was. It didn't get better. It was just horrible. I hated this book. That was definitely the worst thing about it, like how awful that was. On top of that, it was incredibly boring. There was so much plain terminology that I was like, I don't care. And our main character, while facing this dilemma, never once like thought about what he would have to do. He just immediately was like, no, I'm not doing that, and spent the entire time being like, I'm not doing that. So we didn't even get those philosophical discussions that I wanted. This book felt so fucking brain dead and so stupid. I found out recently that it was rejected by publishers 42 times. Simon & Schuster, I hate you for publishing it. Why would you do this? Like, why would you do this in this day and age? I hated this. Do not read it. I'm angry. I'm angry. Thank God after that I read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely loved this novel. One of the best thrillers I've ever read in my life. This is dark academia. We follow our main character who is part of this group of friends in college. When she was in college, one of those friends was murdered and another friend in the friend group was the person who was accused of murdering their friend. We follow 2 different timelines of like their college days and then also of this college reunion that most of the friend group is at. Obviously they're missing 2 people, and then the murder mystery kind of comes up again and we follow them kind of like revealing all of their secrets. What I loved about this is that our main character was so unlikable but so well written. She was a really interesting character and she was so obsessed with being liked and being seen as perfect and beautiful, and I found that to be a really interesting character to be in the mind of. It made for a really satisfying read, and I love unlikable main characters, so I really loved being inside her head. I loved that like every single one of the friends had a secret. It made for a really interesting and riveting read, and it was just so immensely readable. I found it to be absolutely so well done. I devoured it so quickly and it was just so well constructed, so well paced. I think, you know, if you tried, you could definitely like guess what the plot twist and what the mystery is going to be, but I was so like drawn in by the writing and the characters that I didn't even try and guess where the story was going. Like, yeah, of course we were getting like hints as the book goes on, but like I didn't care to try and figure it out. I just wanted to like be in the moment and experience it, and that's very rare when I read a mystery. I have the mind of someone who's like, I need to figure this out before the book ends. I don't know why. One of my red flags. That red flag disappeared when reading this novel and I absolutely loved it. So if you are looking for a really good thriller, a really good like dark academia novel, this one I really recommend. I hardly ever like dark academia books, but this one, like, perfect. Absolutely loved it. And then I read I Found You by Lisa Jewell. I have really liked all of the books by Lisa Jewell that I have read, but this one unfortunately was 2 stars. We follow 2 separate storylines. It's about a girl whose husband goes missing, and then also another woman who finds a man on the beach who has completely lost his memory. And we follow the 2 different storylines, assuming that they're going to be connected. Unfortunately, this book was just incredibly boring, like so badly paced, and there wasn't a single storyline that was like more riveting and intriguing than the other. So the entire book was kind of just like a really massive slog to get through. Like, there was nothing thrilling about this. It was just like kind of convoluted, to be honest. And once everything like wrapped up, I was just glad that the book was over, rather than being like satisfied that the mystery has been solved about like who these men are, where her husband is, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, this was a massive shame, but I feel like Lisa Jewell has so many thrillers that she's published. Of course there had to be a dud, but she's also got a massive backlist, so hopefully I can find another gem like the other books that I've read before. But it was just so boring, so unfortunately a 2-star rating. After finishing those, I have all the books that I read for my screen time vlog, which has been uploaded on my channel most recently. So I'll go through these really quickly because that vlog is an hour long. So I obviously go very in depth with my thoughts in that video. I read Gleam by Raven Kennedy, which is the 3rd book in the Play to Prisoner series, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Does it deserve 5 stars? Probably not, but it was just so bingeable and so intriguing, and I just dove straight in. Like, it was amazing. I obviously can't tell you too much about this book because it is the 3rd in quite a big series, so all I'll say is that our main character's journey in this was so good. The whole series is like a King Midas retelling, so if you know much about King Midas, you kind of get the gist. But it's like fantasy romance, dark fantasy kind of vibe, and I just really love it. The atmosphere is so good, all of the characters are so good, and this series I would really recommend for like beginners to fantasy because it's definitely not hard to understand at all. The political intrigue is obviously there, but it's not like super overwhelming. It's all very straightforward, and I think that's why I love it so much. Like, it's something where I don't have to use my brain, but I still can get transported to like a world that is completely different to my own. So I really love this book. 5 stars. Cannot wait to read the rest of the series. The next book I read for that video was Survive the Night by Riley Sager. I really enjoyed this book. It was actually such a pleasant surprise. I gave it 4 stars after everyone told me that it would be a 1-star book. I actually really liked it. It was silly, it was fast paced, and that's why I read thrillers. Like, it was obviously completely outrageous, and our character was a fucking idiot, but it progressed the plot very nicely, and I commend it for that. This follows our main character Charlie, who recently had her best friend murdered by some serial killer that is on this campus. She wants to go home for Thanksgiving, and so she hitches a ride with a stranger for this like rideshare kind of program that their college does. And once she's in his car, she's like, holy fuck, this could be the murderer who like murdered my best friend. So obviously, like, just from the premise, our character's a fucking idiot. Like, our character is so stupid. But I feel like this book was so good at like blurring the lines of what is reality and what was all in our character's head, because our character had like hallucinations where anything that like happened in her mind, sometimes it would be like way more cinematic than it was actually happening in reality. And I found that to be a really creative way to tell the story. It was honestly just so much fun, and that's why I wanted to read this book. I wanted to have fun, and I had it. I can understand why it could be a really frustrating read for some, and why people would just think it's so stupid. I don't know, it wasn't that deep for me. I had a good time, so 4 stars. Maybe don't take my recommendation for this one because my opinion is very unpopular. Next, I read The League of Gentlewomen Witches by India Holton, which was also a really disappointing read, unfortunately. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. This is the second book in the Dangerous Damsels series, I believe, and this one follows our main character Charlotte, who is a witch, and the love interest Alex, who is a pirate. They have to go on this journey together to like recover this amulet that everyone's fighting over, and while they're on this journey, their enemies to lovers kind of relationship, you know, turns romantic. I just found this book to be pretty boring, first of all, and the relationship was not developed at all. It all happened way too quickly, so the tension was gone. It just really disappointed me, which meant that the charm and the humor that is very similar to the first book in the series, which I loved, it stopped being as charming or as humorous. I ended up really not liking it and being really disappointed by it, and again, it was just another slog to get through. Obviously devastated about this. I will still read the 3rd book in the series and hope that it still has some of that charm and expertly crafted writing that the first novel had, but this one unfortunately was just a bit of a miss for me. Then I read another Kindle Unlimited book, which is The Playlist. This book I also didn't like and gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Again, this book was a road trip romance, childhood friends to lovers, and it was just full of Taylor Swift references. I feel like this book was entirely written to be a love letter to Taylor Swift's music, and while I love Taylor Swift, I cannot deal with the references every 5 pages. I cannot deal with it. It's gimmicky and a bit cheap, and I just don't love it. I also feel like I really hated the romantic hero in this novel. I feel like he constantly crossed boundaries and constantly like went against the heroine's wishes. And yes, you can argue that it was like for her own good, but I don't find that romantic. I don't find that charming. And again, it was another book where there was too much sex happening too fast. Can romance authors just like relax and realize that like a sex scene, unless you're a literal pornographic Penelope Douglas book, if you're writing a sweet romantic story, a sex scene is earned. In my opinion, I think that's how you craft a story. And there are too many books like this which are like supposed to be really sweet and really romantic, and they're having sex within the first 100 pages. It breaks the tension. I'm sick of it. Sorry, we've talked about how I feel about that too much in this video, but this just follows that same trend of just sex havers too quickly. Anyway, it also wasn't very well written, so 2 stars. The next book I read was Every Value Break by Peter Swanson. This book was again very disappointing. Oh my goodness. See, I had a really mixed month, and I feel like I had a lot of disappointing books in a row, but it didn't break my stride. I didn't get unmotivated. I still have quite a few books to get through, but this book was really disappointing. Basically, it is about a newly married couple. They go on their honeymoon, and when they're there, our female main character sees a man from her past that she cheated on her new husband with in the past. She's like, why the fuck are you here? Like, you're trying to ruin my marriage. And all these secrets come up from there. Sounds like a really interesting premise, but it ended up like not being that at all. And at the end of the day, it was just a really gross book about like misogynists, and I didn't want to read it. I feel like this book could have been maybe a bit better if it was coming from a female author's perspective. And Peter Swanson, I do love and respect you, but it just didn't work coming from a male author's perspective, I don't think. It ended up just being really uncomfortable to read, and not in like a fun way. I feel like the pacing at the beginning was also really awkward and weird, and it was, I don't know, it just felt a little bit convoluted. I think it definitely got better as the book went on, but then after the plot twist, I was like, no, I hate this. So I did give it 2 stars. I will continue to read Peter Swanson's backlist because I have rated a thriller by him 5 stars. And this is only the second book I've read by him, but I think I will do a little bit more research when deciding what book of his to read next. Like read some reviews and stuff, because once I went on the Goodreads page, I was like, okay, yeah, this has a lot of 1-star reviews and I can see why. But yeah, I gave it 2 stars. The next book I read was A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley. Again, I read this in my screen time video, but I also read it because it was my Patreon book club book of the month. So I have a full spoiler-filled reading vlog for this one on my Patreon as well. I ended up giving this 3 stars, however, I just felt so disconnected when reading it. Basically, this is about a witch who doesn't have very strong magic, and she's struggling to live up to her family's expectations. But one day a spell goes wrong and she accidentally summons a demon, and she has to fake date him to prevent her family from knowing that her magic is so bad that she summoned a demon. There's also a whole lot of other like B storylines going on here. For example, our main character is obsessed with nature, and there's a lot of magic that has been polluting the nature magic in her small magical town, and I found that to be quite interesting. But the romance itself, I wasn't too excited by. I feel like we knew so much about our main character, but our male main character just wasn't very well developed at all. I barely knew anything about him, and he just felt really tropey, and I don't know, I didn't care about him because I just didn't know him. So therefore, I didn't care about their romance, and that was kind of the whole main part of it. I found some of the like off and on aspects of their relationship to be really frustrating to read about, but one thing I will commend this novel for is its atmosphere. I really loved the witchy vibes, and there was a lot of really charming, like quirky scenes within our main character's magical family, which I found to be really funny and really entertaining. So this book definitely had like some pros, but it also had its faults as well, which is why I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson, which I absolutely loved. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I was in literal tears. Like, I was experiencing so much emotional pain after reading this novel, to the point where my boyfriend was like, are you okay? And I was like, can I talk about my book with you? And he was like, you need to calm down first. Like, it was that bad, like actually sobbing. This is the final installment in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, and it really did not disappoint. I fell in love with it. This was the perfect ending for me. I really love books that aren't all sunshine and rainbows. I really love when we deal with some darker topics and the realities of being a human. And while this book did still have some of those really fun mystery vibes, we still got like into some really dark territory, and I really loved it. I found it to be incredibly powerful. I loved watching Pip's journey and how it ended, and I will just praise this series for the rest of my life. It is so immensely readable. I read it entirely in one sitting. It was so incredible. I loved it so much. So definitely my favorite in the trilogy, and just picking up the first book in the series last year was one of the best decisions I ever made, and has been one of the most pleasant surprises of my entire like history of reading. So I absolutely love this. 5 stars. We'll never stop talking about this. The next 3 books I'm going to be super brief because I read them for a 24-hour readathon where I only read romance novels, and that vlog is not out yet, so I don't want to spoil a whole lot, so I'll just be super brief with these ones. First of all, I read All In by Emma Scott. This is the second book in the Full Tilt duology, and I'm not going to say what this is about because it could potentially spoil the first novel, but it's a really heartbreaking romance duology. I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. I just didn't love it as much as the first book in the duology, and I didn't feel as emotionally affected by it. There were definitely some lines where I like teared up a little bit, but it wasn't perfect for me. I didn't love how the relationship developed, but I still really loved our main characters. I found them to be really beautiful, and I don't know, I just feel like the book felt a little bit rushed for the most part, and the first half was definitely better than the second half. It was on its way to being a 4 stars, and then by the second half I was like, actually no, I have to dock a star, just because that kind of, the pacing was just a bit off. So yeah, this one was 3 stars, but I'm glad that I finished the duology because this has been sitting on my TBR shelf for a little while. Then I read another really pleasant surprise. I read It Here for the Right Reasons by Jodie McAllister. This is a romance set on a reality dating show, and I gave it 5 stars. It was like one of my perfect romances, amazingly paced, so well done. The tension and the yearning was so good. The way that feelings developed was excellent. Our main character is so good, so many important discussions. 5 fucking stars. It's also very much a Jamie coded book because I love reality dating shows, and this just featured so much of that reality dating show goodness. So of course this was going to be a 5 stars for me, but I loved it so much. It was genuinely so readable, so bingeable, and this is going to be my biggest underrated romance recommendation because I've not heard anyone talk about this. Please guys, read this book. It's so much fun. I loved it. All the butterflies. You will see more of my thoughts in my 24-hour readathon, and I get very excited about this novel. And then finally, the last book I read in May was Swear on This Life by Renee Carlino, and I gave this 1 star. We had 2 1-star reads this month, which is just devastating. I had only read one 1-star read the entire year, and then May comes along and is like, here's 2 more. Which brings up my total to 3, which is so devastating. This was just so stupid. So stupid. I think I've actually like blocked a lot of it from my brain. Considering I only read it a few days ago, my brain is like blanking right now because it's like, baby, you don't want to remember this. You don't want to remember this. But basically, this is about our main character who had this childhood best friend. They had a really traumatic childhood together, and now she's an adult, never heard from him since their childhood. And then he releases a book, and it's her entire life story. I just hated this book. I hated the main characters. I would not forgive this man for plagiarizing my life. It's a really risky choice when you're writing a book within a book or a song within a book. Like, you're writing about writing, right? And in this novel, this guy writes this book and everyone's praising it and they're like, it's the best book ever written, it's so good. But we read excerpts from the book, which obviously our author has written. So the author is kind of like calling her own work really amazing. And it's just a little bit ironic because the excerpts from the book that is supposed to be really amazing are really bad. So it was just awkward to read, you know? I'm not buying that everyone's loving this book because it's awful. It's not well written. It reads like a child has written it. There was just so much wrong about this book. You will see it in my 24-hour readathon. I did not like this. I didn't like this, and it was a terrible way to end the month. But that's it for this May reading wrap up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am manifesting a better reading month next month. Even if I read less books, just less 1 stars, please. Less 1 stars. But guys, again, thank you so much for spending your time with me today and watching this video. Let me know all of your thoughts down below and what your favorite book of May was. Of course, a cheeky reminder that all my socials are linked down below, including my Patreon. So if you do want more exclusive content from me, all the information is on the page. But yeah, guys, again, thank you so much for watching. I love you all so much, and I will see you very soon in the next video. Bye.